very cordial conversation, a very helpful conversation. He laid out some of the issues facing the city in the near term that we needed to coordinate on. But I think the most immediate offer he made, which I deeply appreciate, was that his team would be available to us throughout this process. They obviously have prepared transition memos already.
Bill de Blasio, mayor-elect of New York City. Dominic, still sounds strange, Anyway, he made some personnel and transition announcements today, but this morning, can anyone say awkward? Well, de Blasio, he met, as you just heard, with Mayor Bloomberg, and Bloomberg sure looked like a guy in a rush to catch a cab. Not the warmest reception we saw. There was a great still photo that came out of it. So how big was de Blasio's win yesterday? Well, he beat Lota 73-24. I'll do the math for you. 49-point spread. That's the biggest gap since Ed Koch of the first of the two elections he won in the early 80s.
As a Republican. That's a landslide.
I appreciate you taking me off point. That election map, deep blue, de Blasio support. I'm talking from Bronx, big swaths of Brooklyn, Queens. Lota, he won Breezy Point, Staten Island, and the Upper East Side, and not much more. If you want to do it by constituencies, Lota, he won 3 groups, and 3 groups only. He won Republicans, he won conservatives, and he won white men. So with all that,
not by much.
If there is a postscript, because everybody said Joe Lota's a nice man, he seems competent, his resume was pretty good. There were some questionable moments at the end, but could any Republican win this year?
Well, about Joe, very simply, he was probably the most qualified person to be mayor of New York that's ever run. I mean, that goes without saying. If you look at the background of being deputy mayor opposed to being a politician, that's what he was. He was ready to manage the city on day one.
But looked at the math here. Was there any way he could have won?
No, I think one of the challenges here is if Carl Bagala and if Carville, Bagala, and Rove were all wrapped into one, it still was a very uphill climb. What you had going on here, number one, you had tens of millions of dollars being spent against him in the primary, number one. Number two, you had de Blasio with wind at his back after the primary. You had county organizations that weren't coming together because they had their own infighting going on. So anything from the base to start things up and get momentum going was very tough at the beginning. The other thing was, this was really a referendum on Bloomberg, a lot of this. And de Blasio distanced himself from Bloomberg, and Joe Lota, having been a Rudy guy, was tied to what had been going on historically, and it was a change election. So when you look at that kind of equation and where it all comes together, that was a very uphill climb to begin with.
I speak for myself. I was surprised how much Bloomberg fatigue there was. And we got that certainly in the primary process before even the general, and I think Christine Quinn was a little surprised
by that. And there was no runoff. Yeah. I mean, the Democrats unified now like they never had before. Thompson jumped out of the race before it was official that de Blasio had broken 40%. They were all together on this thing, starting from really 3 or 4 days after the election, because officially that Monday is when Thompson dropped out.
Bill de Blasio, unapologetic, clear that he's liberal, proud of it. If you look at the 2 big themes that he talked about throughout the election, stop and frisk, he got out in front when the other Democrats were trying to mitigate their positions. He said get rid of it altogether. And he talked about 2 New Yorks and that he wanted to close the gap, and that was a big statement. Okay, seemed to work. He got elected. But realistically, what can he and can't he get through? And we'll start with the first thing about universal pre-K. Can he actually get that thing through? Because Albany has a vote in it.
Well, he wants to fund it with a high-end income tax surcharge, which I think is very popular in New York. What he's up against is Governor Cuomo, who's not interested in increasing taxes and indeed is probably going to cut state taxes. De Blasio needs more than just the pre-K thing. He needs more state aid to bridge the Bloomberg legacy budget gap of $2 to $3 billion. That doesn't seem to be in the cards. Cuomo wants to cut taxes. So what you're setting up here is a visionary conflict, a conflict of visions between a Republican economic agenda run by a Democrat and a Democratic economic agenda run by a Democrat. Cuomo versus de Blasio is going to be the polite fist fight of 2014.
Who needs more?
They both need each other. Neither one wants a fight. There's no hostility between them as person to person. But if Cuomo is going to run in 14 and nationally as I cut your taxes, but I'm good on gay marriage, and de Blasio is saying we're returning to our FDR roots, those 2 visions can't coexist. And that conflict will express itself in the budget. The last thing in the world either one of them want is a property tax increase in June of 14 because Andrew Cuomo didn't provide sufficient state aid and an income tax surcharge that de Blasio needs to balance his budget. This is not chopped liver.
Do you think they can find a working relationship? Do you think they can find a middle ground where they both gain?
I think it's likely that Cuomo will try to buy him out on pre-K by providing the state dollars. But that still leaves a budget gap to fill that can either be filled by cuts or property tax hikes or help with state aid. Only one of those three is consistent with de Blasio's image as a progressive. This is going to be a real fight.
And speaking of fights, one of the first that Mrs. de Blasio's got to figure out is these union contracts. They're all coming to a head at the same time, Dominic. Did you take anything from any of the administrative stuff today, some of the names that he surrounded himself with?
Not really. He put his team out there, as you would expect. It's going to be very interesting because not only do they want the new contracts, they want retroactive pay. Mayors and governors traditionally, New York City mayors, they don't have the greatest of relationships. The clock is ticking, mark my prediction, on this relationship. It's in their interest to get along, but I just don't see it happening. Bill de Blasio may have all these rosy ideas. The reality is right around the corner in Albany. It ain't gonna happen. Reality's gonna slap him in his face very soon. The honeymoon will be very short-lived for Bill de Blasio.
I spent a lot of time with Joe with the one-on-one meetings with the union leaders, and retroactive pay is a big issue. But one of the biggest problems you have right now in the budget gap you're talking about, the line item for reserves for labor is zero. Every mayor previously had left money in there for the next mayor and for the next mayor. Bloomberg brought that down to zero right now, which is going to be the major issue right now in the
That
budget.
budget gap of $2 to $3 billion doesn't include $2 to $3 billion more in aid, which is why the pre-K tax surcharge isn't enough for de Blasio. He needs help, as Syracuse does, as Yonkers does, to fund a structural gap in his budget as well. I don't know how the two guys do. They can smile at each other all they want. In the end, money is what this is.
And these unions have gone without a pay raise by contract. Based on which one, 2 and 3 years. Now, they do get the cost of living increases, and they do get what's in the previous agreement, but they want to look back for those 2 and 3 years of raises. And that also, don't forget, impacts the pensions, because all this retro impacts the pensions of those that have retired and those about to retire. It is a big number hanging over the city at this point.
Really quickly, I know we're up against it. From what you know of de Blasio, has he been underestimating the process, or is he a little bit naive as to what he's going to run into?
Neither one. He knows just what's going on. It's a gut check time for both those guys.
He's never managed a budget bigger than a few million dollars.
No. This isn't about management.
He doesn't know how to do this.
One of the reasons Joe Lolo lost him is he's running for city manager, not mayor. That's not what this is about. This is about
he's in way over his head. In reality, he's in way over his head. Reality's about to slap him in his face.
I want the cities to succeed. I just have no confidence right now until de Blasio can do anything to show any confidence. We got some big problems ahead of us.
As an aside, a year from now, you think, because Mayor Bloomberg, for whatever people thought, he didn't leave, with a big wet embrace here. Do you think a year from now people are going to miss the Bloomberg years? I mean, they certainly were tired after 12.
Not after a year, I don't think. I think you might see it 2-3 years in. I don't know how dramatically the city could or would turn within the span of a year. But if you start seeing systemic budget problems and cutbacks that really start to impact over the long term, you might see that
Whether
in
it
the
was
second half.
inherited or not, they're just going to say the guy wasn't ready for
the other
prime
issue
time.
is education too, where Bloomberg's been going with education, and you got the UFT that de Blasio's in bed with. You don't know where that money's going to go.
UFT endorsed Bill Thompson. He's not in bed with anybody.
No. The UFT, Richard, jumped into de Blasio's team between they abandoned Thompson before he was out of the race, and they helped push him out of the race, and that helped expedite them working together.
Loved in retrospect, he should have quit after 8 years. It's
true.
I agree.
Well, don't forget, even he would admit that.
Third terms don't do anybody any good.
Now, when we come back here, we will switch gears, and we're going to be talking on the political front about two races closer to home here, and here it is. Westchester and Nassau County, at the end of the day, Republicans, even with Democratic registration advantages, kept their jobs here. What does it tell us? Plus, we'll also talk about some ballot initiatives that have had some consequences far beyond Election Day. Stay with us.